Okay, the other day I thought it was interesting to take some stories that I passed over that were called bizarre stories and put that out. And I put that out in a particular video, and it seemed to have a pretty good response. So I'm doing that again today. So here we are. Now, I'm going to start with this one, and I'm warning that I haven't been able to track this down. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, is supposed to have said the U.S. Navy isn't prepared to face Russia's Navy. Now, I say supposed to have said because I can't find that in a legitimate news source article. If you can find it, you can let me know below. But I haven't found it. I've only found it on Twitter or like Reddit or that sort of thing. But then, then the response was Ukrainians, and without a navy, this is what Ukrainians have done to the Russian Navy. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it like that. Okay, so next big story. So you know what Doge is? Doge is the Department of Government Efficiency, and oops, the Trump officials just fired a nuclear staff, not realizing that they oversee the country's weapons stockpile. So that'll be unwound very quickly, I'm pretty sure. And then this is absolutely insane. So they've fired like I think it's like 60,000 civil servants or something crazy like that. It's a really large number. Don't quote me on the 60,000, but it's a very high number. Saying basically, we'll give you a buyout deal. You have a generous buyout package, but you're gone. Okay. This is absolutely insane. Since Doge began discussing mass layoffs, the median home price in Washington, D.C. has fallen by $139,000. Why? Because it's supply and demand, and a lot of people are just going to be moving from Washington. Okay, in 30 days, nearly 4,000 homes have been listed for sale in and around Washington, D.C. What is happening? Well, here it is. Median sales price was 560,000. Number of homes sold and down 9% almost year over year. Like it's causing a real dislocation. Here's a chart showing the median home price in Washington, D.C. area. 2024 November, median home price was worth 699,000. Now it's down to 560,000, 20% drop. So election day happens, and then Doge starts, and the price of So that's something. Okay. Meanwhile, Fort Liberty is renamed Fort Bragg, effective immediately. Now, there's some background to this story. So, in the United States, we name Army posts after former generals, generally speaking. I mean, that's usually what it is. And we name different, just like you name a ship after like maybe a president or a state or something like that. Okay, so Fort Bragg is the home of the Airborne and Special 82nd Airborne and Special Operations Forces, and so it has some prestige. Well, but Fort Bragg was named after this guy. His name is Braxton Bragg, and he was a Civil War general, because Fort Bragg is down in North Carolina. And for some reason, we rename forts like in the American South, like Fort Lee and Fort Pickett and Fort Bragg and so on and so forth, right? Which is kind of weird to name it after Civil War generals, but that's what we did. Now, but the name had some cachet because if you were stationed at Fort Bragg, well, that's probable that you were one of these more elite soldiers, or let's say. And then during the Biden administration, it was now this is part of the pushback that is perceived of wokeness or that sort of thing. Well, they renamed it from Fort Bragg to Fort Liberty. Liberty's not a bad name, but it's just not Fort Bragg, which is what soldiers had identified with. And it's not because they were identifying with it for some kind of racist thing. It's just because there was pride in having been stationed there or going through there or that sort of thing. So Fort Liberty is renamed Fort Bragg, but there's something a little interesting twist to the story. Fort Liberty is renamed Fort Bragg effective immediately. This is according to the U.S. Army website. The renaming honors the legacy of World War hero Private First Class Roland L. Bragg and all soldiers and families who have called Fort Bragg home. The renaming process will include updating all official documentation, signage, and digital platforms. So they're renaming it Fort Bragg, but after a different guy whose last name happened to be Bragg. So it's not about this guy anymore. And so who was this guy? He was an Army paratrooper for whom Fort Liberty will regain the name Bragg. It just happens to be a fluke that he was a reasonably heroic guy whose last name happened to be Bragg, so they can have Fort Bragg back again. That's how they split the difference. So if you are a some kind of racist southern racist Confederate, like we have to have honor this guy, you're not getting that, but you are getting a name back. And there's probably not a lot of people that are in that camp going, yeah, we need to have Braxton Bragg, but like I wouldn't even have recognized the guy, right? So that's where we are. So that's how they're splitting the difference. And this is the new Bragg, who is the guy that the fort is now named after, so that they can have the name Fort Bragg back. And that's a weird story. I know, it's pretty bizarre. But here's the actual thing from defense.gov website. The new name honors PFC Roland L. Bragg. Bragg received a Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity and a Purple Heart for wounds sustained during the Battle of the Bulge. Bragg saved a fellow soldier's life by commandeering an enemy German ambulance so that he could transport a wounded service member 20 miles to an Allied hospital in Belgium. The ambulance was under enemy fire the entire time. The North Carolina installation, one of the largest in the U.S. Army, is home to the what is that, 18th, took me a second, 18th Airborne Corps and its 82nd Airborne Division, as well as the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. The installation was initially called Camp Bragg from 1918 until it was redesignated as Fort Bragg in 1922. In 2023, the name was changed to Fort Liberty, and that was because there was an era where they were like taking down Confederate war general monuments and renaming everything that they could rename. So that's during that time, during the Biden administration, and well, there we are. For nearly a century as Camp Bragg and then subsequently Fort Bragg, tens of thousands of soldiers trained and developed to crises and conflicts around the world in defense of the nation, Hegseth wrote in his memorandum. Fort Bragg has a long and proud history of equipping, training, and preparing our soldiers to fight and prevail in an operational environment. It's about that legacy. It's about that connection to the community, to those who served. So, okay, it's now Fort Bragg again, but it's for this guy, not that guy. And so that's where we are. Last little story I'll show you with, it costs $0 to be a decent person. And so this is a guy they're at a baseball game. The baseball just got thrown got hit into the upper bleachers. And so they're retrieving it. Well, he's racing a little girl and yay, he won. He got it. Yay. And the girl's, a little sad. Oh, but now she's not sad because he gave it to her and she couldn't be more happy. She's pleased as punch. Just made her day. All right, my friends, it costs nothing to be a decent person. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. Thank you for listening to these bizarre stories, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.